Hi, this is Annette. I still believe that you too can draw with graphite pencil. In the first video, we talked about all the tools that you need for drawing, for 2D drawing. We talked about the papers and the pencils and the tortillons and the erasers and the graphite. In this video, I'd like to share with you how to highlight and how to shade with the tools in your best format. We're not going to actually draw anything. We're just going to practice doing the shading and doing the erasing and mixing the graphite on the paper and how the different pencils vary in what they will do for you. So remembering the tools is really important. And if you're here in the second part of that You Too Can Draw series, please go back and find the first one so that you can really see all the tools that are available to you. Then we can talk about the highlights and the shading.
Hi, this is Annette again. This is part 3 of Graphite Pencil Drawing You Too Can Draw. We want to remind you today about the tools. First off, your pencils, your tortillons. Feathers are my own thing. You know, you can get feathers to brush off the eraser after you've erased. We've got all kinds of erasers. Again, go to part 1 and 2 to figure out what I'm talking about these. We obviously have to have a good pencil sharpener with a nice clean blade. These are the pencils I'm going to start with today just to draw an eye with you. We talked about drawing an eye. We're not going to go for the absolute realistic eye. We're going to go for more of an in-between, not a cartoon eye, but also not a absolute realistic eye, which we can draw either one depending on what we want and the end result. We talked about the dirty tortillon, using that. We talked about your lightest grays, which is a 9H, and you can't always see that on the paper real clear. We talked about how it's very faint. Here's your 6H, so 9H is even going to be less obvious, but very useful for hair, very useful for lines on a leaf, very useful for flowers. So if you like pencils to draw with, you can always add a little bit of color with watercolor pencils and blend it a little bit, or just colored pencils. But we're talking just about graphite, because if you can learn to draw, you can learn to paint, is what they say. So we got a little bit of hair. We just have samples of how to use it. Again, go back to those other videos that we did already. This here is Bristol paper. We want to talk about your papers. These are really dirty because, you know, I draw a lot of portraits and different things, so these are just my spare ones because they got too dirty. We drew this eye just to show you. I will do one with you, but so that you can see the smoothness that is on a Bristol paper. See how smooth? I know that it's hard to really see, but pencil graphite moves a lot easier on this. It doesn't have as much feathery feeling. It's a lot smoother. So we get to shift it around a lot easier, and you get to have more detailed, more realistic coloring. Whereas on the other paper that we use just to sketch, it's very thin, very feathery or furry, as I might say, fibrous-y. So it leaves indentations more because there are indentations in the grooves. I'm not sure if you can see that, but it looks good. This paper's not horrible, but you have more white showing through, and it's not going to get the smooth look for realism as you would on the Bristol. So let's start today. We're just going to use a dirty piece of paper. We're not going to worry about using a fresh white one, but you know that you're going to use a fresh white paper to get your beautiful drawing, unless you're just practicing. So this, we're calling it a practice paper. It's very filthy. But I wanted to talk to you today about how we get the shape of an eye. Really, it's learning to just move your wrist and letting yourself be a little bit loose. We're using a dirty tortillon just to get the shape. We're going to do a fairly big eye so you can see it easily. So we're just doing like a half crescent, a crescent moon on the top. The bottom isn't a crescent moon, but you could draw that first and then get your shape. But really, if you look at anybody's eye, we got the tear duct area over here. We got the crescent moon coming out, and then we add a little oomph to the edge here because we know that it goes back to the ear like that. So we have a little bit. Again, the dirty tortillon is just to get the shape so that you're not putting pencil down where you don't want it. This is just to create the perspective, not the final product. Your final product, you'll start adding pencil. So again, here we go, just a shape, crescent moon, almost a crescent moon down here, but we do curve up a little bit in the center by the tear duct. We create a little bit of a tear duct. And then here, you normally wouldn't see the whole eyeball, so the iris, I mean. So we're going to just kind of put in the edges. Again, they're like a crescent moon. Can you see that? Again, you're not going to get a pure look at the end of this because we've got all these lines in here from it being a dirty spare piece of paper. But this is our shape, and we're happy with that. Then we know it's got an eyelid, so we want to fudge the eyelid, so to speak. Just get one in there. We have lines down here, little creases, sometimes two, sometimes more, depending on your age. But there's always at least one. The nose kind of hangs out over here. It would all be just shading. You wouldn't have any solid lines here to create the nose. But it goes up into the eyebrow. We're not going to do the eyebrow and the nose today. I'm just showing you basic eyebrow, nose area. Comes around. You'd have shading all over the place in here and coming down and around to show the angle down like a mountain. So right now, all we have is we just have a rough tortillon with a dirty tortillon shape of an eye. Now we do need to have to come up with pencil. Let's talk about these pencils. This here is a pretty cool little tool. When your pencils get so small, but you know you have enough graphite on them to still continue to use, you can put them in this. This is very nice because I get smaller and smaller pencils, and I use them right down to about that size. I don't have any right here right now, but I use them pretty small. This is a 6B. 6B is rather nice. We don't have to use our 9B and waste the graphite on that. We're just going to, again, it's a motion with the wrist. We don't come up to the top and put a hard line. Let's fake a hard line over here. We don't do this kind of thing, because that kind of thing, that hard line, is less able to erase if you'd put it in the wrong place. So we stay kind of sideways. We lower our pencil so that it's loose downward, flattened towards the paper, and we work that crescent moon. All this pencil line, because it's not solid, it's all movable. You can move it all around with your tortillons. If you like just a sketch look and that's all you want to do is practice sketching, you can leave it like this just to practice the eye. So this is near the nose, this is out by the ear, gonna go back by the ear, so your shading would end up going that way. We won't talk about that today. I will have 6-week courses to get more detail and really learn how to draw, move your hands and draw many different things, and paint. We're going to go into painting too. So here's a basic shape again. Now we have to add some color to this line. This is our iris, because we need some graphite on here to be able to move it around to get more color. Eventually, we will make some solid lines that we want to keep where they are, that we know. Our proportions are exactly what we want, depending on if we're drawing a person we know or we're just pretending drawing something or an eye about somebody. We'll talk about mouths and cheeks and hair and stuff later. Right now this is just so you get, because an eye is oddly rather simple if you listen to the instructions. We're just adding all this light pencil on so it will move around for us. Need a little more here because this gets very dark, and we're going to have to keep adding to our dark spaces. Again, this is a 6B. 4B might not be soft enough to get the movement. 4B might be more of a finished color. We're going to add a little bit more color in here because we're going to want to move it around. But we want to leave that highlight open. Let's take it now to the pupil. You can always use a glass or some kind of something in your bathroom that's got a round base to it to get the size of the eye you want and create the iris. You can also do that, get something and put it down and create your circle for your pupil. We're just going to sketch it right now and try to get the proportions right. This is pretty centered, so it's going to be pretty centered. Now if it was over here, you wouldn't see all the eye because some of it would be back behind here, so you wouldn't see a perfectly round iris. Now with the pupil, you can add all kinds of color in there. We can start with our 6B, but we'll end up with our 9B or our ivory black because the pupil is going to be the darkest color. I did forget to leave a little highlight in there because you're always going to have some light hitting the eye or the iris or the pupil. That it could be many spots or just a single spot, and oftentimes it's almost a perfectly round circle. Sometimes it's just a little half thing. Sometimes, if you could come up here, we would look at here. Now this might not be realistic, but sometimes the eyes do just have some square highlights or lighting hitting it and reflecting. And sometimes it's more like this, like part of the whole pupil is lit up. And then sometimes it's just around the edge of the iris. We're going to do both of these, some in the pupil, some on the iris. And we need to get that dark because that's going to be our blackest black on our eye at this point. Some of your other parts might be close to as black as that, but not as often. This could be very black or brown. Like if it was a brown eye, it'd be very, very dark on this edge. If you look at brown eyes, it's fairly dark, and then it's of course dark in the center too. And so you still have to put it on really gentle. You have to use the soft pencils. You can't use a gray pencil because it won't move around and won't get you the dark color. Your softer pencils, the B pencils, the higher the number, the darker it gets, the softer it gets. So now we have just a simplified sketch of the shape of an eye, where the pupil might be, where the highlight might end up, and we're going to take a pause and come back.
Back to basics. To apply and remove the tools to get the highlights and the shading, applying variations of blacks and grays, remembering the paper is your white.
We're going to blend our pupil color, our 6B color, to get it to mix and not have all the squiggly lines before we add our 9B. Again, I made a line around there, but I want to smooth it out. So far it's crescent, moons, circles, and just moving your arm, wrist softly. When we go to mix and blend, you have to have a little bit stronger of a pressure, but you never want to have lots of pressure on your pencils to start until you know that that's where you want your line or your marks. So now we have a nice dark pencil line. I know this is going to go into the 9B color, so I'm going to go ahead and get that in there because we're going to be pulling some of that color out into our iris. We're going to borrow from it, so to speak. So I'm going to go ahead and get a lot of color in here. I still, even after putting all this color on, Might need to add more color afterwards because I'm going to be, again, like I say, borrowing and pulling out into the edge of the iris to give it some shading and coloring. This will probably be a blue eye. So we can come pretty strong with our soft 9B with color. This isn't going to come back off, so know that you know that you know you want that eye that big. You're not going to change it now. It's not going to get smaller. You'll have to use a new sheet of paper. And I'm not one for wasting, so that's why we're using this scrap piece of Bristol paper, which is a beautiful paper. All right, so now we have see all the lines in there. You should be able to see those lines in there. So we're going to blend them again to get a nice smooth finish on the inside of that. Like I said, we're probably going to have to add more in there, but see how black that is now? And I know that this edge is pretty dark, so I'm going to go ahead and throw a little 9B in there so that when I start blending, I have enough deep color to work with. Remember, you can turn your paper and do those crescent moons rather easily. Again, if you don't feel confident in that, go get yourself something the size of the circle that you want or have and use that as your edge to create a circle. We're going to go ahead and blend that a little bit. We're not worried about it going in and out of this. We do want to leave a path of highlight in there so that we end up showing a roundness to the eyeball eventually so that it looks and appears like it goes back into that 3D formula. I'm going to go ahead and mix all my color in here, just get a little bit of a coloring started, get rid of my sketchy lines a little bit. We're not going for this realistic total eye, remember that. That can happen in another time. There's also a lot of other great videos out there that do them and show you how to do them quickly. We're going to take our time and do classes, and I'm going to take away some of that eraser, see how nice and white that becomes. But we're going to need gray in here to show that it goes back into the back of the eye. And then blend it. I'm going to use a little bit of a dirty tortillon. Now to bring this in, we come towards this center. We want to always be coming towards that center because then we'll get a better view or a better look at the end if we have our lines aiming towards the center, because there will be lines in there. We're not doing that realistic, but we still are trying for the middle ground there between cartoonish to realistic. See how those lines, they just aim in, will cause that 3D look. Now we're going to pull from this graphite out from this center point, pulling out. Again, we don't want to put color in these highlight areas. We actually can come here, maybe make it a circle here that goes out into the iris. Go a little faster. Again, we want to do it from that center point, bring it out. Steal a little bit of color from there to get our lines coming out. Seems like a lot of work, but we're going for semi-realistic, so we want to do the work. We'll put on real pencil lines shortly, but right now we're still working on just making sure our perspective is good. I'm pretty sure of this spot right here. I know I can go darker here. That's not going to come off. I know I can get darker over here. This is where my eyelashes are going to come out of on the top. But I know I need a pretty solid looking line here as my edge. Even though I'll be pulling out from there to pull the shading outward. I know I can come in here with pretty clean lines and still pull it out and have it lighter if I want to in spots. We always have a part of this eyelid here where the eyelashes come out from the bottom. It's like there's a shelf for them. So we add that in. That's not going to be a solid line. We're going to blend it down, we're going to blend it in, and again, nice solid line can be a little bit not crispy up there, but we can have a solid line. Now let's blend that. We're still leaving the highlight on the tear duct. And now we're going to start pulling this graphite upward in a curvy motion. Again, kind of crescent-y, not quite a full crescent, but pulling it up in a curved motion to cause that roundness of an eyelid coming off the center of the eye. This allows us to have already that curved look coming out of it. We're going to leave a space in the center for that roundness to happen. We'll go ahead and get this eyelid a little bit more solid and pull that one down in, still leaving some white in the center. And then we can blend it all up and down. You see how it's forming, and we can, because we're using a tortillon and not the solid graphite, we can always go back if we think that we need a little bit more highlight on this. We can pull some of the graphite back off and get some fairly close to pure white in there to create that roundness of the edge of the eyelid. Let's go back to the iris and the eyeball. We're going to need some gray in here due to the fact that both these sides have to appear like they're going around. We want to have it looking 3D, not just flat. So we bring that up in here. And if you look at it and you think, well, I need to take some of that white back off, or that gray off again, and get me a little bit higher highlight, you can always add it back in. If it's not enough, you can use your finger, but I like using the tortillons because the oils can make it kind of solid. Let's go to causing the lines. Now, a true eye has squigglies and all kinds of fun things going, but they still come back and forth from the pupil to the edge of the iris. All these things. We're just going to do the more semi-realistic look by causing these lines to again come from the center point. If you need to, you can always place a small ruler from that center point all the way across and do lines like this to go from. You can just do one and get it and go from it and keep turning, or you can create quite a few and go for it. I'm just going to go with my eyeball coming from that center, adding a little bit more 9B in the pupil area as I bring my lines out. Now, if I was doing this to sell, I'd be taking a lot more time with my lines to have them a lot more coming directly from the center and going to the exact center. At this point, we're just getting the look. And we'll will have some H's coming in at some point, because say a blue eye would have some light colors coming in. So that's for facing the center. Now we have to come around. You can do this, I promise. If you follow my instructions, you too can draw. So instead of putting this on a time lapse, I'm having you watch me. I'm just speeding through so you can see the actual function on this one and not do a time lapse on this. We might do time lapses on other things, but right now we'll just do this. So see how we're getting, again, the look. So right now it looks fairly cartoonish, but if we start pulling that in and blending, those lines dissipate a little bit. They're still there. And see how we're leaving that center part a little bit with light coming in, like light's hitting the iris also. We're not going to blend that whole thing. We're going to come in with some lighter colors in lines. Here's a 3B. We'll get some 3B lines in there, so it's a little lighter version. And some F. F is a black color, but it's a hard pencil. That line is there. It's leaving a groove as I put it in. It's not going to erase so much. It'll leave a groove, which even if you erased it and had the groove there, that could be a nice clean line. I'm causing the edge of the iris to have more defined color. We're going to come back with that 9B, and I'm going to give it some real solid color here. It's not always. Some people's eyes don't have a real solid line here. It's often kind of an in-between, but there's more often a line than not. I feel pretty sure of where I want things, so I can put my 9B, not necessarily an H, because I don't want the groove. I just want to be able to move my pencil around, but still have a very dark edge. At this point, I can always move color out of it to make it lighter. And up here, this line is pretty solid at some point. Of course, the smaller you work, the less space you have to move to get a clean line. But see how we're getting cleaner and cleaner? And then we can come down here and we can cause this little wrinkle in this area. Let's go ahead with this bottom edge here where the eyelashes go on the bottom. We're going to color that in a little bit. We're going to take the pencil back out where we think it needs highlighting. We're going to take a little color and form a little bit of a curve going in. So it shows that it's shelf kind of thing rather than just a flat 2D version. And again, we're just getting proportions. We're just showing the effect that you can have. You can remove. Maybe there's light in here, and you wouldn't see all that solid line. Maybe it's lighter down in here, and it blends in with the bottom part of the skin. So we leave room to move the pencil and to remove the pencil. We leave the space. Then we know that it's going to be shaded down here. Whether you have a tan or you're white, you're still going to have color down here. The only place you're not going to have color is where the light is hitting and adding highlight. It's very rare that any picture you do is not going to have some color on it when you're working with your grays, because you get to have so much. Getting into the details of the hard H's and things like that for hair and some of these lines, when I get real trying to make it so realistic, I use almost all my pencils on every piece, whether it's in the mouth or in the eye, but I use all my grays, or most all of them. And see, these grays can go up into your highlight without losing your highlight. You can even put a couple in here, but you still have your highlight. So you want to remember that your grays can hang out in your highlights, especially if it's hair. And that's all we're going to do about that. We'll talk about a little bit about the eyelashes. You do a curve, like it's like you come down like this and shoot up. And that's not so hard to do. And that might be an eyelash. An eyelash might look like that. They might crisscross. And as they come further up, they're like short here, obviously. You look at your own eyes and they're short. But they come this way on this usually. And then we can get longer and longer. And we're going to put some up here because some of the pores for the eyelash where it comes out, there's even a little dot on the edges of them, if you can see that, where the hair follicle is. So we're not, again, trying to get these exactly where I might do them for a person, but that's one way an eyelash can be done. Lighter colors, you can use your grays, because some of them aren't all black, right? Some of them are very thin. I have blondish ones at times, so we're going to need our grays for that. The eyelashes on the bottom, they come out from in here, that shelf, maybe on the edge, but you can put a little dot. It's like a comma, a long extended comma, and they might crisscross over top of each other, angle in, angle out. These here are pretty sporadic. Then they start to line up a little bit more, and they might be up here, they might start down here, but you can add that little dot. That's going to get it more realistic, because it does show that hair follicle many times. And then over here is the same thing.
Back to basics. To apply and remove.
So we're showing the so-called shelf for the eyelashes to bounce out of. Sometimes the upper eyelashes are not coming upward. Many times, even more times than not, depending on how you took your picture. If you were underneath or over to the side, you might see the eyelashes coming down onto the iris. They still, when you see it from the side, they're coming up, but the way you view it is it's coming down and you see it on the iris, depending on where you took the picture and how you took it. So some eyelashes might come down, some eyelashes might come up. It might be a variety. You might have these eyelashes that are coming up that are reflected into the eye, and if you want it realistic, you can show that into the iris and onto the eyeball itself, the white part of the eye. We can clean up all these edges real clean, or we can have them loose. It just kind of depends on how you want it to appear. So again, this is kind of a combination eye. It's not a complete eye, and it's on dirty paper. And you would come up here then from here to get to your eyebrow, shading upward. And as you get closer and closer to it, you may want to change some of it. You might want to add it darker. You might decide you want it to look more like a brown eye instead of a dark blue or green eye. And as you study more, you'll see it. So that's all we're doing for now. Always sign your work, and have a great day.
Remember, we learned how to apply the shading and to remove the shading. Review it in your mind and review it on your paper. And now that we've applied it to an eye, we can see here that we can add color pencil to it. These are Prismacolors added to the graphite just to take the artistic license to do what you want with your drawings. Thank you for joining me. You too can draw. Please remember to subscribe so that you can be notified about the most recent videos from Captured Moments as we move on from pencil to paint and pastel and watercolor paints and different types of working with materials.